Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Brennan German, president of Bright Talent, and you have joined us for the Rapid Change Management webinar series, and this is webinar number 5. And we'll be meeting with Savine Talley today to talk about HR optimization. And in fact, the title of the webinar is Need to Optimize Your HRIS. Here's where to start. Usually it's a pretty big project, and so we wanted to just take the opportunity to walk through a couple of key areas in terms of optimizing your HRIS. So I also have on the screen here with me Renee Maurer, who is our head of operations, and Renee is going to be our moderator. So in a minute here, she will turn off her video, but she will be the voice in the background, especially when we get into the Q&A session towards the end of this webinar. And then I will do more of a proper introduction to Savine in a minute as well, after I give context to this webinar. And just really excited that we have everybody here, and we're going to talk about this topic because it's very, very relevant. But just to give context, we call this Rapid Change Management series. And last year, we saw an opportunity to give back to our HR community by doing several things. And I'm going to share our website so that you know where to go access all of this free information. So if you were to go to our website, you would come to brighttalent.com. And there's one of two ways to access the Rapid Change Management series. One is you can click on this green bar. It'll take you right to what we call as our playbook, which I'll describe in a second. Or you can go to resources, click on guides, and then you will see different guides come up. The Rapid Change Management series, you click on that, and then now you'll be at the Rapid Change Management series website. And what we've done is we've developed this Rapid Change Management playbook, which is really going to be pretty much everything we talk about today. So if you're looking for resources after this webinar, come here and you can download this playbook for free. It's got tips, tools, templates in terms of how to do project management, how to do change management. And it's just a nice book we created so that you have a playbook to work with. And so you're not just starting from scratch. And then obviously we have our webinar series. And then for those of you that don't want to do it yourself, we also have services that we can help you as well. Regarding this webinar, so we're recording this webinar today, and you would click on this webinar page to access this webinar. So once we're done, so here's today's webinar that you signed up for. Once we're done, we will upload this webinar to our website so you can see these past webinars we've done and completed already. That's free to watch on demand. So after we're done here, we will actually upload it here as well, so you can come back for on-demand viewing. So just wanted to make sure you all understood the context of where this webinar series came from and why we call it. So thank you all for joining. And in terms of the format, this is what I call a micro webinar. I'm sure, like many of you, I prefer when things are short and concise, and then I could be done with it, but come back and access it. So that's the purpose of this webinar. It's 30 minutes in length. It's podcast style. So Savine and I are just going to sit here and chat. There's no presentations. Hopefully some of you are saying amen. So we'll talk about 15 to 20 minutes amongst ourselves here on the topics. And then we're going to go into a 10-minute Q&A. So this Zoom webinar functionality allows you to insert questions that then Renee, who's behind the scenes, will ask us as she reads your questions come in. And then Savine and I will, or hopefully Savine mostly, will answer those questions for you. And so what I'd like you to do is, as we're talking, as your questions come up, just enter the questions live as you think of them, and then we will get back to those questions. And then the other thing I'd like to hear from you as well, as we're talking, if there's different topics you would like to have a webinar about that we have different experts, let us know in the Q&A section, because we'd love to have, the most relevant information that's relevant to our HR community for this. So ask away as we're sitting here chatting, and then let us know if there's anything else you would like to see in a webinar. All right, so to dive into this topic, This really came up because we've been talking to a lot of different clients, or at least we're hearing a lot of different clients say with the economic uncertainty, there's been a lot of great workforce planning. I don't think I've seen workforce planning in my years other than this year, just being so cautious, I guess, and careful and strategic and intentional. And so with that, a lot of budget for new technology investment is not there. So I see a lot of organizations just looking at what they already have and wanting to understand how do they optimize this. So typically when you're optimizing processes or practices, you are starting with the system and the software. And really what we cover today is not even just about software, but that's where a lot of things begin. And so today we're going to talk about how to optimize your current HRIS. And there's two key areas. One is gap analysis. It's kind of like, where do I start with gap analysis? And then how do I effectively project manage this through to make sure it doesn't create this giant, what I call spaghetti ball, and then you're just trying to pull noodles out. You're actually getting order to this process, and how to really engage your vendors, because your vendors should be your ally in this, in that they should be helping you and wanting to really get you using their software as well as possible. So we're ready to jump in, but let me properly introduce Savine Talley now. So Savine Talley is the founder of Sebco, and she provides HRIS implementation and process improvement consulting services. With over 20 years of experience, Savine has led HR systems implementations, configurations, operational optimizations for trusted brands such as Nestle, St. Joseph's Health System, Sims Metal Management, Riot Games, Maricol, Agility Fuel Systems, and many more, including several of our clients. Her high competency in project management principles, integration of disparate systems, business financial acumen, and change management success really sets her apart. But I think she would tell you the most important thing she does is be a mom to her 8-year-old son. I know that's the most important thing she does. Other than that, though, she does have a lot of expertise. So I'm excited to have her here. Welcome, Savine.
Thank you so much, Brennan. I appreciate the introduction. And I actually really appreciate you putting together this webinar, because this is today's reality. And most of the time when my clients come to me, it's usually they already have a system implemented, they have staff in place, but they are struggling with inefficiencies. So the first thing that we discuss is understanding the lay of the land. What's our current state, which is referred to, as you mentioned, the gap analysis. Who are our business owners? What are we doing today? And when we say system and processes, it's not necessarily technology. It could be system, internal HR systems and processes that were put in place.
Right.
But as we know, when those systems were implemented, they were set up based on previous companies' status or state, and companies evolve. And as they evolve, a lot of times there's no alignment between how the system evolved and how the company evolved and how the system was set up. Right. That's where we find ourselves with struggles and challenges, and then inefficiencies are created.
Yeah, and I think what's so interesting is you say that perfectly, because we get into growth and there's a catalyst, right? It's either growth or perhaps a pain point that becomes so evident you can't ignore it any longer. The noise has gotten too loud. So maybe there's 2 points here, I think. When we do a gap analysis, perhaps one is there's a vision of what you want to be, right?
Exactly.
And the other is there's a pain point you need to heal. And sometimes that pain point is not simply putting a Band-Aid on it that we so often do when we were in hyper growth mode, but now maybe we have a little time to do it. So what are some of the steps you could go through, whether it's trying to achieve that vision or even try to understand that pain point and how to fix it, but fix it for the long term, not just a Band-Aid.
Yeah, and you said it correctly, the vision. So, and where do we get that vision from is most importantly, your stakeholders, your major stakeholders buy-in. I usually meet with them, understand what their end goal, what's their vision, what is this going to look like, and then based on that, I interview their business owners, each area. What are their pain points? And usually the current state leads to all these pain points that are uncovered. And those pain points then trickle down to how can we fix it? How can we fix it means what are our new requirements? What is our ideal future state? And that's how it kind of is segmented between interviews and understanding the lay of the land, all the way to what are we going to do? What is it? What optimization are we looking for? And that also potentially leads to how are we going to repurpose our staff, the time, the capacity? How is this going to lead to that efficiency?
Right. And some of the things that we've been seeing lately, I mean, that you and I have even worked on, time card integration, for manufacturing facilities. You're obviously applicant tracking, how to make that entire process from a candidate coming in all the way to being a hire. Lots of issues usually along the line. And then on an HRIS, digitizing electronic files, right? Trying to get all those paper files back into the system, or just HRIS in general is so clunky, you can't use it how you would prefer to use it. So I like what you said, you kind of capture that vision, capture that pain point, and build a questionnaire around it, right? I think what we're saying, really just making it simple. So that way you're asking everybody the same questions, you're getting comparable data. And then identifying the key stakeholders. Well, let's talk about that for a minute. So to affect change, if you're in a smaller business, or there's less people that you need to then kind of sell on the idea that they need to operate differently, or just making changes inside of HR, that might be simpler than trying to get people that are nothing to do with HR, right? They're all in their different functions, but trying to influence. So to get that influence, to make that change happen, there, like you said, it buy-in, and maybe for me to understand is, I think the most key, especially the significance of the change, how many people you're impacting. You start at the CEO, right? I would assume.
Absolutely. Yes.
So maybe how do you speak to the CEO about something like this?
Yeah. So with, obviously the CEO and your executive leadership team, it's more high level. It's understanding how is this going to impact their bottom line? What is the incentive of making this change that's going to align with where they're going within their overall vision or their overall ecosystem? And then based on that, you kind of go top down, and it's really just CEO as, the 1, 2, 3 bullet points, bottom line. Then you go down to more of the, your senior directors, your executives and whatnot. How are they going to be impacted? How is their staff going to be impacted? Because as I said earlier, that potentially leads to some restructure, some reorgs. We often hear, employees or, staff is worried or threatened by the fact, oh, we're putting in new systems. Is this going to replace me? Well, not necessarily. A lot of times we repurpose these, these functions because, yes, we automate in certain areas, but it doesn't mean that we eliminate. In some cases, there has been instances where we have, and that, that is a cost saving to the overall bottom line. However, a lot of times when there are lean teams, we can't really afford to eliminate. And we get to the point where we're just creating that efficiency, just repurposes the time. And whereas things were a little bit bumpy or a lot bumpy, we get to the point where things are streamlined, and then we have more time to think of things that we couldn't think about early on.
Yes. That's a great point. And I'm just sitting here thinking, I've been a business owner now for 12 years. If I could go back in time when I was an HR leader, what I've learned more just about finance, revenue, costs, operating expenditures, and then put some of what I had implemented more in context of the way the CEO thinks, the head of sales, CFO thinks, versus just more people-centric, I think I would have had a little bit more success and probably irritated less people. That's what I said, no, we need this just because. So I think that key buy-in is just critical to affecting change. So with that, so just setting that groundwork, I always like to say it's the funnel effect, right? Start at the highest level and then down to those details so that you're not just doing the Band-Aid anymore. Now you've got a wholesale understanding, vision, and execution plan on how you're going to do that. So planning. So that really helps you get to planning. And so that's where we're going into our next topic here, which is project management and vendor management. And I want to make sure
Yes.
I lump them together. Those are really two distinct things. So now that we've got this vision, where we've got this general idea of the plan, project plans can be intimidating, especially if you haven't done any project management courses or understood the principles of it. But it is pretty basic to understand if you just have a couple of key things. So if someone in the group here doesn't have that project management experience, they haven't built a formal project plan with Gantt charts and the whole bit, which you really don't need to be successful in this. Maybe what are some key things in terms of building a project plan?
Yeah, so understanding what does this entail? Based on the documentation that we put together following these interviews, you can pretty much put, that leads to kind of your RFP, your request for a proposal, which is your requirement, right? Put together your requirement, and then understand that actually gives you the scope. Based on that scope, it actually leads to me discussing with the vendor, what is this going to entail? What is this client signing up for? Often enough, the vendor had already set up the agreement with the client, and there is also something called service levels that are put in place that are forgotten. So that is really more on the vendor management, yes. But at the same time, the vendor, as you said earlier, is supposed to be the partner, the ally. So the vendor, when proposing, all these changes, it is their responsibility to provide all that breakdown of what that entails, what the client is signing up for. So that project plan, at the end, is put together based on all these different outlines of what is it that we're going to achieve, what is the end result going to look like.
Right.
And really, it's just understanding who is impacted, who's going to be spending time in doing or making these changes, what resources are going to be utilized from within the company and with the vendor as well. And then, presenting that to the leaders, because at the end of the day, that potentially represent costs. So all that aligns with that particular change. Also, there is a piece which is the change management, meaning who are we communicating to? What are we communicating? And that pretty much sets us up for working with a vendor, which is that piece of the vendor management. Now, vendor management, I have a lot to talk about because, I actually am very passionate about the fact that a lot of vendors, forget that service level that they agreed upon. And then the client ends up having to clean up, pick up the pieces, potentially incurring additional costs that really they didn't sign up for in the beginning when they signed that contract.
Let me pause right there. I think that is so critical. So there was a lot of good information right there. So I just want to make sure I kind of break it down in my own mind. So when we talk about the project plan, we're wanting to make sure we understand the requirements. So then the requirements, it's your process, hopefully whatever changes you're making are creating some efficiencies for you, some automation, maybe you're moving to self-service for the employees, whatever that is. So make sure you understand what the workflow is, how that software is supposed to work with your workflow. I think that the worst thing you can do is to create a not good process and try to fit it into the software. This is an opportunity to improve the process and then put that improved process, make the software work for you. It's not always perfect. There's often workarounds, but you want to make the software work for you. So you're going to outline the requirements of what you need that software to do. So when we're talking about a project plan, for example, when you open a requisition, it should create, as an example, it should create a number, and then it should create maybe some kind of job description library to pull down. And if the software doesn't do that, then you need to make sure the software can do that. So then you're going to your vendor with this requirement. I need the software to do this. And what you're saying is a lot of times the vendors forget, the software vendors forget they're working for us versus instead of us trying to fit in their perfect box. And so this is why I think it's so critical. You always have a client side project manager like yourself when you're doing any kind of changes, because they'll tell you they have the project manager, or they'll tell you they have the expertise, but they're doing it through their lens. They're not doing it through your company's lens. So when you're going to that vendor, make sure you're outlining those requirements of what you want the software to do for you. And generally, is this true, Savine? Generally, when you hear no, it can't, do you just say,
Yes.
okay, or do you push back a little bit?
Oh, I never say it. Okay.
Right.
If you ask any of my clients, that I never take a no for an answer, because oftentimes with a vendor, it's no because it works for them, but it's not necessarily no because it doesn't exist. There's always a solution.
Right.
There's always a workaround. There's always a way to do it. And so when I work with clients, it's usually to translate their requirements to the vendor. And because vendors in general, they have the system, they have the technology, but they don't necessarily want to work extra hard to make or create the efficiency for this client. They usually want the client to utilize their system and have their own staff deal with all the internal processes and or efficiencies.
And what I've also learned through you and in plenty of clients, you dive in and you realize in the hustle and bustle of initially implementing the software a year ago, 2 years ago, you forgot you had 3 more modules that you're paying for and you forgot to implement those. So oftentimes you actually might be paying for things that were not implemented. Sadly, the vendor's never going to tell you that because they're off implementing other things. So that's also a critical thing. So for example, often we'll see electronic offer letters. You forget that you bought that module, but it hasn't been implemented, or onboarding modules. You just never took the time. This is the time to do that and really have that vendor work for you, not vice versa. Right. I just think that's such a critical point.
Yeah.
So just back to project management, if you go to use a tool like MS Project to document kind of what you need to do and your requirements, that could be a little intimidating if you've never used that. What are some other tools out there? I think this is an important question. What are some other free or really inexpensive online tools out there that they could use? I know Excel is a possibility, but Excel has limitations.
Yeah.
Cascading dates and changing dates as things change. Do you know of any other online tools out there?
To be honest, most of my clients, use Excel simply because nobody wants to deal with another project management tool. Okay. MS Project has been the tool, but it is, like you said, rather a little bit complex. And I don't think it's complex in a sense of the technology. It's complex. It just gives a lot of times a lot more data than the client needs. Yeah. There are systems like, Jira is one of the systems that sometimes I use with clients. Confluence was one. They're not necessarily just project management tool. They're project management and more sharing, like document sharing and, other, functionality that they offer as well. I to be honest, I don't necessarily use online, but there are, like you said, many that you can sign up for with free subscriptions and free memberships or very minimal membership or subscription fees.
Right. Okay. And I think Basecamp is another one that comes to mind that I've used in the past with other projects. So, okay. So now I think we've got time here to go to Q&A, but before I do that, did you have any other comments on the vendor management piece? Because I know that's an important one.
Yeah. I also recommend that when looking at optimization, go back to your contract, look at what you signed up for, because like you said, it's not necessarily just what you didn't implement. A lot of times during contract signing, there are components that are kind of lumped into the overall pricing that are not even discussed. So as you said, it's not so much just the known components, it's the one that nobody was aware of.
Sure.
So go back to your contract and look at what you have, because you can utilize it. And a lot of times you'll find out that, hey, I have an inefficiency here that I can solve by using the system and utilizing what I paid for.
Great information. So now we're going to move to Q&A. And so the voice behind the scenes, Renee, I think is going to come in, and hopefully we have a few questions, Renee.
Well, you guys have done such a great job at answering so many questions already as they come in. But I do have a couple. So One that is coming through is around like the charter. Sometimes, we hear the charter document coming up in a project. How necessary is it to complete a charter, or when do you decide you should go to that extent to creating one and developing one?
I honestly think, and I've created many charters, to be honest, and often enough, I create the charter because it really, we're trying to build the business case with the leadership team or the executive team. And this really gives them that high level, why we're being asked to spend this money, why is this change going to happen? So it's really to provide that business case and that visibility to the leadership and executive team and align with their vision.
Yeah, great point. I would just add that's where you're going to have that consistent messaging, right? Everybody knows. It's just like any program. Everybody's going to know what the vision mission is for that. And that's what the charter accomplishes.
Great. Thank you. So when you are out there looking at vendors and you're kind of at that early stage, right, of doing a vendor selection, like what is the starting point to look at these vendors, and how do you go about narrowing it down, especially when you don't have a huge budget?
Yeah, so initially we used to look at, major vendors, or look at major vendors in conjunction with the type of client. So a lot of times, a company like Workday is trying to sell a system to somebody in mid-market or like a small business. So I usually, based on experience as well, obviously, I usually look at top 3 vendors that are within the same realm, like, small business, medium, enterprise, whichever the client is within. And I dive in and understand the requirements. And then based on that, knowing what that system's capability is, I then provide that client those options and then do a proper vendor selection and scoring matrix.
Great. Thank you.
And that's a loaded comment, scoring matrix.
Yeah, it is.
There's a lot of work there.
I kind of threw it in there at the end.
I know. Well, it's important, but unfortunately, we're trying to do this short. But yeah, follow up with us. Actually, some of these tools might be in the playbook I had mentioned before, but you can always follow up with us after. And I guess I should have said that at the beginning. Follow up with us after. We have tools we can share with you.
Okay.
I just wanted to throw it in there.
Thank you.
Yeah,
absolutely.
No, that's an excellent point too. That's it on the questions right now.
Okay. So I would just go back to that when you're talking about selecting a new system and building those requirements. Really, you're not diving into the nitty gritty of those requirements. Generally, the highest level need of that requirement. And for those of you that have heard the term RFI, request for information, so an RFI would be where you capture some of those high level requirements. And then to Savine's point, you're going to maybe have a list of 10 vendors and you send that out to the 10 vendors. The whole idea is to try to, whittle that down to maybe 3, right?
Yeah,
That's generally a good number. So then you get down to about 3. You don't want to demo 10 vendors. You'll be exhausted you'll just really start getting burned out. So
that's why you hire somebody like me.
Well, exactly.
I've already done that.
Right. Well, you might come in with some knowledge already about software, but if you're just even trying to do it by yourself, want to get it to about 3 vendors, and then you develop that deeper questionnaire of how does it truly function, and then you go into, to your point, the demos with an actual scoring matrix that is the same for each, so that you get comparable data and know which ones actually more closely meet, and then you simply do a scoring like a test and understand which more closely meets your needs. I think that's essential to making a decision. I don't know, anything to add there, Savine?
No, this is it. It's pretty much doing a comparison and coming up with a point system. There are plenty of different point systems out there. I've developed one that works for my clients, but essentially it's comparing apples to apples and putting it together so that it's a visual, and then presenting it to the client so that they can make a decision. It's pretty straightforward once you get to it.
Well, we're on the half hour here. It's 9:30 Pacific time. So thank you everybody for joining us today. Sabine, thank you so much for
Thank you for having me, Brennan.
and sharing what you know with us. It's so important. So I wish everybody a blessed day, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk later. Thanks.
Okay, have a great day. Bye.